2024 was a great year for me in many different aspects of my life, but I really had a ton of fun and learned a lot when it came to my training and fitness. And in today's video, we're going to look back on the year 2024 through my ups and downs, the training I went through, the different events and activities I did throughout the year, and a big lesson I learned. And then we're going to look ahead to 2025 at some of my plans and goals regarding my training and some of the events I plan on and hope to participate in. So starting off 2024, I was in pretty decent shape relative to where I had been in the past. And I was coming off this high of crossing the 1,000 mile mark of running in 2023, which I was pretty excited about. And especially since I pretty much just started running from scratch in January of 2023 without much prior running experience, and I ended up running 1,000 miles in that year. So I was excited about that, but turning into the beginning of 2024, my main focus shifted to rowing. It was my senior season of college, and so I was kind of more focused on rowing and really hoping to do well at the national championships in May. As part of the UC rowing team, we practice 6 days a week, 2 hours a day pretty much. Not all of the 2 hours a day is like intensive training, where there's warm up and then cool down and we do some stretching at the end and stuff like that. But 2 hours a day, 6 days a week is pretty much what we did for our training the whole semester. And the first 3 months, January to March, pretty much just indoors on the rowing machines. And then in mid-February, we attended a race, a virtual indoor race type thing on the rowing machines. And I set my personal best in the 2,000 meters, so I was pretty happy with that. But I was hoping to go a little bit faster, so wasn't the most excited, I guess. But it was a PR, so have to celebrate that for sure. And then in March, we went on spring break to our spring training trip in Clemson, first time on the water for the spring. And then after that, we transitioned to on-the-water training back in Cincinnati and continued training until mid-May when our national championship called Accra was. And training was going well. I was putting in some extra practices with my pair partner Connor at another rowing club, and we were getting some additional coaching there. And we definitely made a lot of improvements, which we were happy about, and we were excited about this upcoming championship regatta. And this whole time I was still running a little bit, just 15 miles a week pretty much, which is not a ton if you're training to run a marathon like I was, as I was planning to run the Flying Pig in May. And I figured that combined with my little bit of running and then good bit of rowing training, they're both cardio activities, they both use the legs a lot, so I thought that would transfer over. But May 5th rolled around and I had a pretty aggressive goal of 4 hours for my very first marathon, and I'm not really sure why I chose that goal or why I thought it would be achievable, because it's required to run pretty much a 9-minute per mile pace for that whole marathon in order to do it in less than 4 hours. And I very rarely ran at 9-minute pace. Most of my runs were between 9:30 and 10:30 probably pace a lot of the time. So even if I was doing a lot of training, I still wasn't getting that practice in the right pace range that I needed for that race. So I went off at the pace I was required, 9 minutes per mile, but by the half marathon mark, even before the half marathon mark, I was struggling bad and was like walking some and just doing really bad. And I got lightheaded and stuff, and eventually at mile 15 I quit and DNF'd, which I'm super upset about and embarrassed by, but that's what happened. I'm not gonna lie about it or anything. And so that was my first marathon experience. Didn't even finish and just came away with a DNF, which, like I said, I was really disappointed in. But I didn't have time to sulk over my marathon DNF, because in just 2.5 weeks we had the national championship regatta coming up called Accra that we were building towards. And the last 2 weeks there, Connor and I put in a lot of extra work, and we had a nice taper per our coach's instructions. But me personally, I didn't feel super recovered and fresh in my legs come the day of the first race. But we went out there and we did our best. And in the heat, we had a really fast heat, and so we ended up not advancing to the semifinals, which was super disappointing. We went significantly faster in that race than we had ever gone before, and faster than we went the previous year, but unfortunately it just wasn't enough. Like I said, we had a fast heat, so we didn't advance. We went to the C final the next day, and we won the C final, but it was still a disappointing result, and ultimately that placing we had this year was worse than the placing we had the year before, so that was like I said, disappointing. We did, go faster, so there was certainly self-improvement, but in terms of performance against everyone else, it was a very disappointing result. Yet again, I didn't have much time to sit around and be upset, because on June 3rd, I got in the car with my parents and drove up to Baxter State Park in Maine, and on the 5th of June, I started my southbound Appalachian Trail through hike from the peak of Mount Katahdin. I had a fairly aggressive goal for this through hike, by most people's standards at least, of finishing the whole Appalachian Trail in 100 days, and at 2,197.4 miles long, that's an average of 22 miles a day, while carrying all my, camping supplies, my hiking supplies like my backpack and any other things I need, clothes, water, food, stuff like that. And I carried about 3 to 6 days worth of food at a time for most of the trip. And the northern 400 miles or so of trail are some of the toughest miles. So the first 3 weeks there were pretty challenging for me. I had a lot of long days, 10, 11, 12, maybe even more of hiking hours during those first few weeks. But I still had a blast that entire time, those first 3 weeks and the rest of the trip as well. I didn't have any super major injuries, but I had plenty of smaller injuries. Like I had some skin that was rubbed raw on my heel for a number of weeks, and I had a few days here and there, tightness in my quads or hamstrings in a particular spot every time I stepped. I did bruise my ankle up pretty badly when I banged it against a rock sometime. And then towards the end of the trip, the last like 2-ish weeks, I had some shin splints that were at one point seemed fairly bad, but they went away, sort of tapered off towards the end. My biggest day of hiking throughout the trip was 44.7 miles, during which I hiked for about 16 hours to complete the 4-state challenge. And here's some additional stats here. The mileage isn't perfect since it was captured with my watch. The official mileage, like I said, is 2,197.4 miles, and my watch said 2,110.9. But I hiked about 22 miles of trail each day and gained just over a mile in elevation per day. This is certainly an accomplishment I can say I'm really proud of, and I don't think I'm ever going to forget it. I did learn some additional lessons from this trip, and they're kind of pretty similar to the lesson that I learned from the Flying Pig Marathon, so I'll elaborate more on that later on in the video. I did make videos during the trip. I made a video every single day on the trail and posted those on this YouTube channel here, so if you're interested in learning more about that experience, definitely go check those out and watch some or maybe even all of them. The last few weeks of my AT trip, I did wake up each morning with a lot of stiffness all over my body, but especially in my legs. The good thing for me though was that after I got moving, maybe an hour or two of hiking, my body would loosen up a lot and I would feel pretty good the rest of the day and not have much soreness or pain, during the later half of the day. And so I didn't really think much of this since it really wasn't a problem long term. But once I finished the through hike, all that soreness kind of caught up to me since I stopped hiking for hours on end every day. And the day after I finished, we were driving home back to Ohio, and my legs were just so sore that day. I was just sitting in the car, which is just the opposite of hiking. So I was sitting in the car for hours instead of hiking for hours. And when I got to Cincinnati in the afternoon, I was super tired, even though I had just sat in the car that day and hadn't done anything, and actually had gotten a lot of sleep the night before and slept in. So my next challenge after the Appalachian Trail was just recovering from the Appalachian Trail. So when I got home, I basically didn't do anything for almost a week. And after 5 days, I eventually tried running just for the heck of it to see how it would go. And I only ended up going 1.4 miles at a 13-minute per mile pace. So that was atrociously slow. And even though it was that slow, it was still difficult for me. I did a little bit more training over the next week or so, and then did some fitness tests 14 and 15 days after finishing my through hike. So the first test I did was a 2,000 meter row, and like I said, I set my personal best on that row on the rowing machine 7 months prior in February, and that time was 6 minutes 44 seconds. And after my AT through hike, I only managed 7 minutes 16 seconds, which is actually my personal worst time at that distance in terms of actually trying as hard as I could to do that 2K. So that was a little disappointing. I did a 5K run as well, and that ended up going a little bit better. I clocked in around 23 minutes 15 seconds, which is Still considerably slower than my PR, which was a little bit below 21 minutes, but that 23 minutes 15 seconds was kind of in the ballpark, or close, generally speaking, to what I was hoping for I could achieve after the AT. So after those tests, I did set some goals for the end of the year, but for this type of thing, I really didn't know what the best way to recover is, and I don't know if there is really a best way to recover. I kind of took it easier than, I was training back in the spring, but I think, started training pretty quickly. I was training probably 3 to 5 days a week, even in the first few weeks after I started training again there. And, they weren't super long training sessions, not as long as I was doing before, but it was still 3 to 5 days a week between rowing on the rowing machine and running. November and December were fairly uneventful. I did run an informal half marathon with some friends and wore jeans for that one just for the fun of it. And then I ran a turkey trot 5K, which was below 22 minutes. So that was a good improvement in just 2 months that I was reasonably happy with. And then on my 23rd birthday in December, I did my annual birthday run, which is where I run, the amount of miles for how many years old I am. So I ran 23 years for the 23rd birthday. I was disappointed though in my end of year results. I did a 2K row and 5K run again, and my 5K run was pretty much the same as when I did it a month and a half earlier at the turkey trot. And my 2K row wasn't below 7 minutes at all, which I was disappointed in for sure. Here's some other stats for the year. I ran a total of 754 miles during the year, with just under half of those miles coming before my Appalachian Trail hike, and just over half of those miles coming after the hike. My average pace across all those runs was 10 minutes 23 seconds per mile, which I'd say is pretty solid, and I'm pretty happy with for where I'm at right now. I did a lot of rowing and erging this year as well as part of the rowing team in the spring. So I erged just over 1 million meters, or 1,000 kilometers, and then I rowed 636,000 meters in the boat, or 636 kilometers. And then my total rowing and erging time combined was 141 hours, which is compared to 130 hours of running that I did. So fairly similar in terms of cardio between rowing and running. Now, there was one big lesson that I learned in 2024, and I'll talk about that real quick before we move on to 2025. And this is what my rowing coach calls the specificity principle. And the idea of this is that if you want to be good at a specific activity, you have to train that activity a lot. And if you train a lot for one activity, but then you try to go do another activity, that training might not translate all that well, even if it seems adjacent. And this might seem obvious to you or other people, but it didn't seem super obvious to me at first. For example, in the spring, like I said, I wasn't running all that much, but I thought since I was doing a lot of rowing and erging, that would prepare me reasonably well for the Flying Pig Marathon, since there's a lot of cardio involved in both, and both of them involve your legs. And in terms of the cardio, the rowing helped my cardio probably a similar amount to how the running would affect it. But the running and rowing movements are just different, and so they use different leg muscles, and you just have to train for running in order to be good at running. Training a lot for rowing isn't going to make you a super awesome runner. So that is definitely something I learned from the Flying Pig Marathon, and then that sort of translated over the same lesson to the Appalachian Trail, because I really didn't do much hiking at all that spring. I tried to get out on some hikes, but I never really had all that much time that I was able to put into doing some hiking training. But I thought, I've been doing a lot of rowing and running, so I'm sure I'll be fine and in good shape. And to some extent that was true, but the first month or so I was just carried by my overall level of fitness, and I certainly wasn't in quote-unquote hiking shape that first month. Hiking shape is just different than even running, just because you're carrying weight on your back and you're going more slowly, so it's kind of big movements with each step that require more energy with each step, as opposed to running, which is kind of smaller steps that require less incremental energy, if that makes sense. And when you're hiking, you're going up big hills and mountains and all that stuff, and you're navigating difficult terrain all the time wearing your pack. So all that kind of stuff combines together, makes it a very much different activity and type of shape than something like running. So again, just the idea of the specificity principle is what I learned, that if you want to be good at a particular activity, you have to train that no matter what. And so I'm hoping that as I go forward and prepare for specific events or activities, I can keep that lesson in mind and make sure I train those specific activities. And again, it's just another reminder that sometimes, people can teach you things from the theory and they can talk about it, but until you actually do it and experience it, then maybe you might not understand it quite as well. They do say that the best teacher is experience. So looking forward now to 2025, which we're already more than 10% of the way through, I have a lot of fitness related goals and plans. So my general plan for the year is as follows. I want to continue running consistently and also add in some strength training to my routine. So in January, I ran about 110 miles, and I hope to continue similar mileage throughout the year. But the more important number for me is hours run per week, because that's something that can be more consistent. Mileage depends on the terrain and the weather and your fitness and all kinds of stuff like that. And so to keep it consistent, it's much better to focus on actually hours run, because the past few days, for example, it's been colder and there's snow on the roads and trails and sidewalks and everything, and that slows you down. And it's been windy, so that slows you down too. So focusing on hours makes more sense to me. So my goal is 5 hours per week of running, so nothing too crazy. But a big adjacent goal of mine is to add in strength training, and I've just started doing that about a week ago. So my goal here is to do 4 30-ish minute sessions per day, so about 2 hours of strength training per week. And right now, I'm not planning to get a gym membership or anything. I'm just going to do it right here in my apartment. You can see maybe I got the pull-up bar back there, so I'm doing pull-ups, push-ups, dips, have some small weights, so I can do some little shoulder exercises, stuff like that, and then some various leg exercises, just with my body weight and some weights and maybe a little bit of extra weight in a backpack. I think that will be more than enough, at least for where I am right now, in order to make some big improvements on that this year. Another area I do want to improve upon as well is my flexibility and mobility. So I think some of the soreness and post-hike fatigue could have maybe been mitigated a little bit if I was stretching consistently every day throughout my Appalachian Trail through hike. So my goal here is to stretch 5 minutes every single day this year, and so far I'm holding to that. Most days it's just 5 or 6 minutes, but sometimes I get a little bit longer, closer to 10 minutes, something like that. So it's really not a ton of time, but it's just a little bit incrementally. Like they say, if you can get just 1% better every day, then pretty soon you're going to be so far ahead of where you are right now. So that's kind of the goal with the stretching there. And an awesome milestone I'd love to hit is a sub 20-minute 5K run. I'm not really going to train for that specifically, but if my fitness progresses throughout the year and I am eventually able to achieve that, I would be super happy. But since I'm not training for it, I'm not going to be disappointed if I don't achieve it as well. And there is a number of events that I'm interested in participating in this year, and that list has sort of changed quite recently as well. I do want to get redemption in the marathon distance this year, but I didn't want to pay for the flying pig, so I was originally just planning to kind of do a marathon on my own, sort of in training, informally. But I just found out that my new employer will pay for me for my entry in the Cleveland Marathon, which is just 2 weeks after the Flying Pig Marathon in mid-May. So I'm really considering doing that, and I think at this point I'm probably going to sign up for that, since my company employer is going to pay for that. And another event I kind of wanted to do was the Allegheny 100 Challenge, which is a hiking challenge in which you try to hike 100 miles in Pennsylvania in 50 hours. And I don't really want to pay for that one either, just because the race and event doesn't really provide you much. But I think I'm still going to try to hike 100 miles in 50 hours. There is a trail in Ohio called the Ohio and Erie Canal Towpath, and that trail is just about 100 miles long. So I'm thinking I'll just go from one end to the other and then add on a little bit to get to that 100-mile mark and still try to do it in 50 hours or less. And then 2 more running races I might do this fall. The first one is the Boulder Beast, which is a 24-mile trail race in Pennsylvania that goes through this big boulder field. My girlfriend Alexis did that last year, and we're probably going to do it together this year. And then the other one I want to do is the Stone Steps 50K, which is a 50-kilometer race in a park, Mount Airy in Cincinnati, which I ran at that park a fair amount when I was in college, and I really enjoyed it there. And I know a lot of the people there that are going to be running it or organizing it and stuff like that. So that's in mid to late October, and I'm looking forward to doing that as well. So despite a number of disappointments in 2024, I had a really fun time with all my training and fitness endeavors and adventures, and I certainly did have some successes and high points as well. I logged a lot of training hours, some of them alone, some of them with friends, and I did hike the Appalachian Trail in 100 days, which is something I don't think I'll ever forget and something I'll always be proud of. I worked hard after that AT hike to build back my fitness. In 2025, I'm hoping to continue running and add some strength training and stretching in there, and also test myself a number of times at various races or events. I'm really looking forward to the journey, and I hope you guys stick around to see where the year takes me, because I certainly don't know where that's going to be. As always, thanks for watching to the end of the video. I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you all in the next one.